And in this military hospital in Gosport in southern England, the Royal Hospital Haslar, a baby boy is born, and a mystery begins.
Secrets have always been hidden within the palace, but this time, one leaked out. Camilla, often the quiet watcher in the background, allowed a whisper to slip, one that could shake the monarchy to its core. George was born. As a girl, a revelation so dangerous that it could alter the royal line forever. Upon hearing this, William explodes in fury, and what he did will leave you speechless. But why did Camilla bluntly say this to the public? Did she have any strong evidence to back up this claim? The secret allegation. The whispers started softly, carried on lips that dared not speak too loudly. In the quiet of the palace halls, Camilla leaned in close to a trusted ear and let her words slip. George was born as a girl. Her voice was low, but her claim shook the air. It was more than a rumor. It was a secret so heavy it threatened the very walls around her. The palace, normally calm and orderly, turned into a storm of hidden fear. Faces grew pale, servants walked quickly, and doors that were once open now stayed firmly shut. Inside, disbelief clashed with panic. Could the future king's story be so different from what the world believed? It was a thought too dangerous to say aloud. Behind closed doors, hurried meetings were held. Papers were signed. Orders were given. Everything had to be controlled. William, red-faced with anger, issued commands sharper than ever. "Not a word leaves this room," he warned. His tone left no space for questions. Doctors, nurses, and staff were bound to silence as though their voices had been chained. Fear sat heavy on every shoulder. Camilla, standing at the edge of it all, felt both shut out and too close at the same time. She could see the way William moved with restless fury, the way Kate kept her eyes down, the way staff avoided glances. Something was hidden, yet no one would tell her directly. The more the silence grew, the more certain she became that her claim carried truth. She was not part of the decisions, yet she felt the weight of them pressing in. The palace was no longer a home. It was a vault, keeping secrets buried deep. But why was Camilla so sure of this? What really happened during the birth of Prince George, that didn't add up. The day George was born. July 22nd arrived, and with it, the world's attention was fixed on a single hospital. Reporters camped outside, their cameras ready to capture history. Crowds cheered, flags waved, and every television screen waited for news of the royal baby. The atmosphere was electric. Inside the hospital, however, the mood was far from simple celebration. Kate, pale and weary, faced pressures that no camera could capture. Doctors moved in and out with serious faces, and the air carried an edge of tension. It was not the story the world imagined, but one carefully guarded behind closed doors. Camilla, present but not in the spotlight, paid close attention. In the corner of a hallway, she overheard something that froze her. A doctor's voice, low but sharp, said, "We must keep this quiet." Another replied quickly, "The public must never know." The words struck her, heavy and unsettling. At that same moment, William's presence filled the corridors. His jaw was tight, his eyes fierce. Staff avoided his gaze, knowing his temper was close. He demanded answers, then silence, all in the same breath. Fear, not just joy, seemed to rule that day. Outside, the press continued to smile and shout with excitement, unaware of the storm inside. The world saw the proud parents step out with their child, the perfect picture of happiness. But for Camilla, the sounds she had heard lingered, questions circling in her mind. She carried those words with her. "We must keep this quiet," like a shadow that would never leave. But why would the palace go to such lengths to silence even whispers of George's true birth? And now that words were out, how did William react? William explodes. It began with a single remark. Camilla, never one to hold her tongue, made a quiet comment during a tense family gathering. The room froze. William's face hardened and his eyes locked on hers with a fire that could not be contained. "You dare say that again?" His voice thundered through the silence. The words struck like lightning. The air between them crackled with anger. He accused her of betrayal, of crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. His voice shook with rage, but beneath it was something else: fear. Camilla did not back down completely. She held her ground, though her voice was softer now. She knew the truth of what she had hinted carried more weight than she expected. Every syllable felt dangerous. Kate sat still, caught between the storm. Her hands folded tightly, her lips pressed together. She looked at William, then at Camilla, but spoke no words. The loyalty of a wife battled with the quiet dread of a mother. The silence in her eyes spoke louder than anything she could have said. William paced, his anger spilling into every corner. He warned Camilla never to speak of it again, his words sharp enough to cut the air. Yet, in his fury, he revealed what he had tried so hard to hide, that her words had power because they carried a sting of truth. Camilla felt the weight of her own actions. What had begun as a whispered thought now burned like fire, impossible to control. The family she had hoped to stand beside seemed more divided than ever. But why would William's reaction be so explosive if there was truly nothing to hide? Kate's silent struggle. In the early years of George's life, Kate seemed to wear the crown of motherhood with effortless grace. To the world, she was the picture of perfection. Her gentle smile, her soft gestures, her every appearance wrapped in elegance. Newspapers praised her as the ideal royal mother, and photographs showed her glowing, calm, and composed. Yet behind those polished images, there were shadows that only a few could see. At times, her steps appeared slower, her gaze lingered longer than it should. She smiled when she had to, but her eyes, in rare, unguarded moments, seemed to carry a weight far heavier than her years. The pressure of being flawless was unrelenting, and no mother, no matter how graceful, could truly escape it. Every movement, every word, was judged not just as Kate the woman, but as Kate the future queen. The whispers of Camilla's shocking claim did not leave her untouched. Though unspoken, they seemed to press on Kate's shoulders with a silent force. Camilla noticed it most. She had always been a watcher, someone who read what others missed. She studied Kate with quiet interest, noticing the pauses in her sentences, the faint trembling of her hands during certain appearances. To others, Kate was shy, modest, a private figure, but to Camilla, the signs pointed to something deeper. At family gatherings, when laughter filled the room, Kate often stayed quiet, her voice rarely rising above the hum of chatter. And whenever the subject of George came too close, his future, his role, his birth, she would shift in her seat, her smile tightening just enough to betray unease. Camilla caught those moments, storing them carefully like pieces of a puzzle that only she believed was real. To the outside world, Kate's image never cracked. She remained the adored Duchess, strong and graceful, carrying herself with poise that few could rival. But within the palace walls, the strain was written in the silence she kept. It was in the way her shoulders stiffened when whispers floated too near, and in the way her eyes avoided questions she did not want to answer. Camilla's thoughts grew restless. Was Kate's silence a shield, a way of protecting her family from further storms? Or was it, in its own way, a confession? Quiet, unspoken, but undeniable? The more Camilla watched, the louder the questions became. Could Kate's silence be the strongest confirmation that Camilla's claims were not entirely unfounded? The palace's damage control. The palace moved quickly, as if every whisper was a fire that had to be put out before it spread. The royal communications team worked day and night, carefully shaping the story the public would see. Nothing was left to chance. Every photograph of George was staged with precision, every smile rehearsed until it felt natural. The world saw him as a happy, playful child, dressed in perfect little outfits. His photos were released only when the palace decided, never a moment too soon, never a detail out of place. "Make sure the background looks warm," one advisor murmured during a shoot. "No shadows, no doubts." Every picture was painted with purpose. Public appearances were planned like theater. George was shown waving to crowds, holding his parents' hands, laughing at small things. Each scene carried the image of a boy who was destined for greatness. What the public never saw were the long discussions, the strict orders, and the endless corrections behind the curtain. Insiders whispered that staff walked on eggshells. One wrong word, one misplaced detail, and their careers could vanish overnight. They lived in fear, not of the child, but of the secret that seemed to hang over him. Say nothing. Do nothing. Just follow orders, one staff member was told repeatedly. The silence was suffocating. Camilla, watching from a distance, could not help but laugh quietly to herself. To her, the effort was almost unnatural, as if the family was trying to rewrite nature. She whispered once, "No matter how hard you polish a story, the truth always shines through." Her words carried both mockery and warning, a quiet reminder that secrets had a way of finding their way out. The palace worked harder than ever, but the very intensity of their control only fueled more suspicion. If everything was truly simple, why was so much effort being spent to prove it? If everything was truly normal, why did the palace work so hard to control every image and word about George? Camilla's motives. People often ask themselves, why would Camilla risk so much by speaking such a dangerous secret? To understand her, one had to look deeper into her place within the royal circle. She had lived years in the shadow of Diana's memory, forever compared, forever questioned. Even as queen consort, whispers of the past clung to her like chains. Her relationship with William was never simple. He respected her role but carried the scars of his mother's story. To him, Camilla was both part of the family and a reminder of wounds never fully healed. Kate, graceful and adored, often drew the light that Camilla could never fully capture. To many, she remained the outsider who had stepped into history's harshest spotlight. Resentment may have grown quietly within her. Each time she saw the younger royals celebrated, she felt the sting of being overlooked. "They forget what I endured," she once muttered in frustration, her voice carrying both pain and pride. Perhaps her words about George slipped out in a moment of anger. Or perhaps, as some believed, it was no accident at all. There were whispers that her slip of the tongue was a deliberate strike. She knew the power of her voice. She understood the weight her words carried. By planting doubt, she could change the way the world saw the perfect picture that William and Kate presented. Yet another thought lingered. What if she spoke not out of spite but out of fear for the monarchy itself? Maybe she believed that secrets, once buried, only grew darker. Maybe her revelation was her way of protecting the crown from an even bigger scandal that could erupt later. Her motives remained a mystery, caught between bitterness and duty, jealousy and protection. Camilla's words could be read as cruelty or as warning, and no one could ever know which was true. But did Camilla reveal the truth out of spite? Or was it her way of protecting the monarchy from a bigger scandal later? The ripple effect. When Camilla's claim finally slipped beyond the safety of palace walls, it was as though a stone had been thrown into still water. The ripple was instant, spreading in circles no one could control. Insiders who caught wind of her words gasped in disbelief, some refusing to even repeat what they had heard. Royal watchers, always hungry for even the faintest drama, clung tightly to every whisper. They did not know if it was true, but the very possibility that the story of the future king was not what they thought shook them to their core. The media was quick to notice the scent of a scandal, circling like hawks around the mystery. But the power of the crown was too heavy for them to push too far. No paper dared to print Camilla's claim outright. Instead, they danced around it with careful headlines. Strange silences. Royal mysteries. The birth that changed everything. They wrote in hints, in shadows, never daring to put the rumor in black and white. Behind their caution was fear. For one wrong word against the monarchy could mean the end of their access, or worse, legal action from the palace itself. Inside, William grew sharper, his temper no longer hidden. His calm exterior cracked into something far more intense. He moved to protect George with a fierce determination, shielding his son from every possible threat. "No one will touch my boy," he warned the few he trusted, his voice like steel. Those words carried both love and fury, the mix of a father's heart and a prince's duty. Kate, on the other hand, tried to be the quiet anchor. She urged William to remain steady, to let the storm pass, to trust that silence and time would cover what words had begun. "Patience, William," she whispered one evening, though her eyes betrayed the weight she carried inside. She knew too well how whispers could grow into fires if given even the smallest breath of air. The family walked in tension, each step measured, each expression carefully crafted for the public eye. Behind closed doors, however, the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Every photograph released was examined, every move questioned, every gesture picked apart by the outside world. What had started as Camilla's whisper had now become something larger, an invisible shadow following them everywhere. The ripple had begun, and no one inside or outside the palace could say how far it would spread or what destruction it might leave behind. Could this rumor spiral out of control and damage George's path to the throne? George's future. Question the whispers that Camilla had unleashed did not vanish. Instead, they grew stronger in the shadows, carrying with them a question too dangerous for the palace to answer out loud. What if she had spoken the truth? What if George's future was not as secure as everyone had been led to believe? For centuries, the monarchy had rested on rules that seemed unshakable. The eldest son was always seen as the natural heir, the one who would carry the crown into the next generation. George, from the moment of his birth, was celebrated as that child. His christening had been broadcast, his first steps captured by photographers, his presence hailed as proof that the monarchy had a future. He was the symbol of continuity, the reassurance that the line remained strong. But what if that symbol was built on uncertainty? The idea alone was enough to shake the very foundations of the institution. It was not simply a matter of gender, it was about truth, trust, and the legitimacy of the crown itself. Behind palace walls, discussions grew hushed and tense. Advisors exchanged worried glances as though the walls themselves could not be trusted to keep secrets. "If there is even a shadow of doubt, it could last for years," one advisor warned, his voice low but sharp. Another added, "This family has survived wars and scandals, but doubt in the line of succession? That is poison." William felt the sting of those words in his heart. George was not just a prince to him. He was his son, his joy, the child he had promised to protect from the storm of public life. But every time William opened a paper or heard a whisper in the corridors of power, he feared the damage was already spreading. Kate, though quieter, carried her own weight of sorrow. She tried to soothe William's fears. "People love George for who he is," she reminded him in soft, steady tones. "That won't change." But her husband's face remained troubled, his eyes shadowed with the weight of history. They both knew that in the monarchy, perception often mattered more than truth. And perception could be manipulated, twisted, reshaped by rumor until it became impossible to separate fact from fiction. Camilla had done more than speak words. She had planted a seed. And that seed of doubt, if watered by public speculation, could grow into something neither William nor Kate could control. Would George still be accepted as the rightful heir if people believed Camilla's story? Or would history one day record that the crown had been passed down on a secret never meant to see the light? If the truth broke free. The question haunted every corridor of the palace. What if Camilla was right? If George were truly a girl raised under a different name, the fallout would be catastrophic. The monarchy had always thrived on tradition, rules, and the image of perfection. Any breach in that image was dangerous. But this would be unprecedented. The public's faith in the monarchy was already fragile, worn thin by decades of scandal, tragedy, and controversy. If the truth broke free, it would not simply be a family matter, it would become a national crisis. Trust would shatter, and with it, the bond between crown and country. The press would swarm with accusations, headlines would scream betrayal, documentaries would dig into every detail of George's early life, searching for proof in photographs, in doctor's notes, in whispers from hospital staff. Every smile Kate had offered to the cameras would be re-examined, every public moment dissected for signs of deception. For the public, it would not just be about George's identity, it would be about being misled. If they lied about this, people would ask, what else have they hidden? The monarchy, once seen as a steady anchor, could suddenly appear as a house of mirrors. Parliament, too, would be forced to act. Debates would rage about whether George could remain heir or if the succession should pass to Charlotte, Louis, or another member of the family. The law might bend under pressure, but the institution itself could be left scarred forever. And what of George? The child at the center of the storm would grow up knowing his every move was judged not only as a royal, but as the subject of the greatest controversy in modern monarchy. His school years, his friendships, his sense of self, all could be stolen by the constant noise of speculation. For William and Kate, the heartbreak would be unbearable. The parents who had tried to shield their children from the harshest parts of royal life would instead be accused of orchestrating the greatest deception in modern royal history. Their bond with the public would fracture, their reputation forever marked by doubt. And yet, in the silence of the palace, the truth remained locked away. Rumor was powerful enough to do damage on its own. Camilla had not needed proof, only suggestion, and as long as that suggestion lingered, the monarchy lived under a cloud that no crown, no tradition, and no speech could easily disperse. Could the monarchy survive if such a truth were ever confirmed? The question was terrifying, and yet it lingered like a shadow no one could escape. For in the end, it was not only George's future that hung in the balance, it was the very survival of the crown itself. But do you think the monarchy would ever survive if the truth about George's birth was fully exposed? We don't know about that yet, but for now, the best they can do is pretend that it's all rumors. But how long will this last for? William's breaking point. On the outside, William remained steady. His smile shone at events, his voice carried strength, and the people saw him as the dependable prince they had always admired. But behind the closed doors of the palace, a very different picture unfolded. William was reaching his breaking point. The tension between him and Camilla grew sharper with each passing week. What had once been polite conversation now turned into heated words. "You've said enough," William demanded, his voice firm but filled with hurt. Yet Camilla refused to step back. "The truth has its own life," she replied coolly. "It doesn't matter how tightly you try to hold it." Those words pierced him deeper than she knew. William feared not only for George's future but for the entire image of the family. He worried about what every whisper might mean, about how quickly stories could turn into something far greater than the truth. He carried the fear that his son's destiny, the crown itself, could slip through their hands. At night, when the cameras were gone, William sat in silence, his head bowed, his hands pressed against his face. He was a father first, but he was also a prince bound to duty. To see those two worlds collide was tearing him apart. Kate tried to keep him grounded, reminding him that their children needed them strong, but even she could see the storm inside him. Camilla, however, stood unshaken. She would not retract her words, no matter how many times William pressed her. Some insiders whispered that she almost seemed to enjoy his fury, as though she knew that every moment he fought her, the family grew weaker. William's public strength was beginning to feel like a mask he could no longer wear. For him, this was more than a rumor. It was a battle for his son's very place in history. And as the silence between him and Camilla turned into a war of wills, William finally reached his breaking point. Would William's fury be enough to silence Camilla once and for all? Aftermath. A family divided. When the storm finally settled, it left scars that would never fully heal. The royal family, once careful to show unity at all times, now stood quietly divided. The smiles at public appearances remained, but behind those carefully arranged faces lay hurt, mistrust, and silence. William and Kate chose to pull back from the spotlight. They shielded George and his siblings with fierce determination, guarding their privacy in ways the world had never seen before. Every photograph was chosen with care. Every word to the press was weighed and measured. For them, protecting their children was the only way to survive. Inside the palace, though, the air had changed. Conversations that once flowed freely were now cautious. The bond between family members had weakened, replaced by unspoken doubts. George's laughter could still be heard echoing through the halls, but the adults walked as if carrying heavy stones in their hearts. Camilla, however, remained untouched by the silence. She moved forward as though the storm she had caused was just another chapter in her life. Her words, whether meant in spite or in truth, continued to echo far beyond the palace gates. Some believed she had revealed something real, while others dismissed it as cruelty. But either way, the world would not forget. The monarchy now stood in one of its most fragile moments. History had shown that crowns could be lost not only to wars, but to whispers, and this was one of those times. Families could mend, but kingdoms were harder to heal. And so, the royal family carried on, fractured but standing, uncertain if the future would see this moment as the beginning of something greater, or the slow unraveling of a dynasty. And now the ultimate question remains: was Camilla telling the truth, or did she create the greatest royal illusion of all time?